Good afternoon. I'm Jim Griever, and we are at the Public Library of Cincinnati in Hamilton County in Cincinnati, Ohio. Today is February the 25th, and our recorder is Dennis Daly, and providing transportation services today is Leona King, and we are pleased to be able to interview Bill Robson, who served the United States Navy in World War II. Bill, why don't you start by telling us what the mood of the country was like at the time when you enlisted and where?
Well, I enlisted in Northwest Washington. Actually, took my oath in Seattle. My parents had moved out to Washington. We were still in a recession. Prices of farm products were going back up, but there still were few jobs. Listening to Edward R. Murrow and his news from Europe, things really looked very bleak as far as I was concerned. And then I think it was early in 42 or 40 that the Congress and the President started to draft young men. And I don't think basically too many people were prepared. I remember I graduated from high school in '38, and across the river from us, Boville Donovan was logging, and somebody had set off a big charge of dynamite, and this kid jumped up. He said, "The Japs are coming." But I think he was one in 1,000 who realized how close we were to war even then. Most people, I don't think, they didn't want to admit it or something. I'm not too sure. So myself and a neighbor boy went down and signed up, and they took us to San Diego for boot camp. First week or so, we passed out small clothing to the new arrivals in camp. And then we went on a 6-week training. We had a good chief and a bad chief. But we all made it through. But one of the interesting things is that they took us out to see how good we could handle a rifle. And they issued us leggings. And I couldn't figure out why the Navy was issuing leggings. But I think that was a holdover for the gunboat days of the early 1900s.
Yes.
Because when I got aboard the ship, we made an exercise of a landing, and I guess maybe we had 50 sailors carrying 1906 Springfields, and they had their leggings on that day, and they made a landing someplace, and with the Marines, we had a company of Marines aboard in Brooklyn. I got through boot camp and got 9 days leave. Took a Greyhound bus home to visit my parents one more time. Got back to San Diego, did a week or two of mess cooking, and got to eat all the fruit, fresh fruit that I needed and wanted, more than I'd ever seen. Then we went up to Long Beach. And from there we went across the Pacific to Pearl Harbor, which I didn't know much about, and a hospital ship. And I was a mess cook again, and I fed all the people from my company all the oranges and grapefruit and bananas that they wanted. And we separated, just a few people got aboard the Brooklyn. That was a modern cruiser, probably built in about mid-1930s. 6-inch guns. For anti-aircraft, we had 5-inch 38s and some old 3-inch guns. And I think we had 4 50-caliber machine guns, which were wore out. We went out for target practice at least once or twice, but somebody spotted a white cap out there, and there was a conversation, I can imagine, between the gunnery officer and the captain that maybe they better wait for a calmer day. They wanted everything to be just as easy as it could be. Then the next thing I knew, we were on a friendship cruise down to New Zealand and Australia. A heavy cruiser, Brooklyn, and numerous destroyers. We stopped at Samoa and Tahiti. Now the people of Tahiti, the merchants knew that there was a war going on. Aboard ship, you got 20 francs for $1. The merchants would give you 60 francs for $1. They really wanted all that dollar that they could get. And most of the merchants were Chinese. I don't know what that tells you, but it must be something. And then we went on, and I didn't realize it, but we were under wartime cruising. We were zigzagging, no smoke, and I don't know what we did with the garbage, but when I was in the deck division at that time, and I was after lookout. It was pitch black one night. I mean, you could hardly see your hand in front of your face, but something caught my eye in the glasses, and I reported it. And about 10 minutes later, the junior officer of the day came back and thanked me for what I did. Well, I didn't realize it then, but we had changed courses by time. And if everybody didn't do it at the right time, somebody could be run into. And we went to New Zealand. The heavy cruiser went to Australia. And the thing I noticed right away, there were no young men in New Zealand. They were all gone to the war in Europe. An elderly gentleman stopped me, and he wanted some American money so he could get the Time magazine. We came back to Pearl Harbor. It wasn't too long before we took off, and there was a lot of gossip about where we were going. A lot of people thought we were going back to Long Beach. But the first thing you know, there's the canal setting in front of us. And we passed through the canal, and it was interesting to see the people handling the lines on shore. They were so professional and so good. And we go, and we stop at Cuba for a beer. I don't know why else we stopped. It was bad beer. And we sailed up north to Boston, and that was about the end of May, and I helped tie up the Rodney, the British battleship that had helped fight the Bismarck. And then we took off, and we stopped at St. John's, Newfoundland, and then we joined a convoy. Instead of we were taking troops to Iceland to relieve the British troops up there so they could go home and fight the Germans. On the way up, we noticed a boat off our starboard side, and so we moored the longboat, and Chief Boatswain went over with it. And the rumor was that there were several frozen people in those boats, and he cut a hole in the bottom of it and let it sink. And the next thing that interested me was we were bound in by fog. The ship was 500 yards ahead of us, you couldn't see. So they lowered like a raft. They put up a big spray and towed it several thousand or 1,000 foot or so behind the ship in front of you. And you kept that in view, and we kept on it probably about 15 to 20 knots. And we finally arrived in Iceland. And the interesting thing there was that an hour before sunrise, we went to general quarters on orders from the admiral. And within a minute, Captain Stone reported manned and ready back to the Admiral. And the Admiral says, I doubt that. The captain says, may we fire one salvo across your bow? And of course the answer was no. We stayed there for just a short while, and then we came back, and we're cruising along. I think we visited Norfolk and maybe New York. And later in the year, we visited Portland, Maine. That's a big harbor there, big, huge harbor. And I went ashore with a friend of mine from boot camp. And around 6 o'clock, we came back to the dock, and we were going back aboard ship. But it's so foggy and stormy that when the longboat is loaded, the coxswain says, I will not be back tonight. It's too stormy out there. So I didn't think anything about it. We had a few dollars and we could go to a hotel. But we went to the hotel and they were all full. So they allowed us to sleep on the floor. And we found out the next day that the coxswain couldn't find our ship in the fog. He missed it. You know, he went 10 minutes at a certain degree, and then he'd switch and go 5 minutes, and he missed the ship. So the ship's ringing their bell, and he's trying to find it by going back and forth across the harbor, and he finally finds it after about an hour. So that was the bell that the messenger used to tell time. We'd strike one bell for one, and bell and a half for two, and 4 we'd start over again. And then we moseyed on down, and we were in Bermuda at Pearl Harbor attack, and I was on messenger watch on the quarterdeck that day, and the officer deck said, run up to the radio shack and find out what's going on. And I come back and I said, we're at war with Japan, I think. And he grabs the telegram or the paper from my hand, and he goes up the steps 3 at a time because he can't believe it. And but we were at war. It was after lunch is all I can remember. And so right away the captain went over and we filled up with fuel and supplies. And we stayed there that night, and the clipper comes in. And the chief who's in charge of the anti-aircraft gun, he's about ready to fire, but he can't get permission. And I had to go through the officer of the deck to the captain and the executive officer. But then they turn the lights on and he realizes that it's the clipper coming in. And the next day, I'm on a deck above the main deck, and the captain's talking to the chief who was in charge of the gun. He said, the next time a plane makes a run on us, you shoot it down. I can't care whether it's friendly or enemy. When they make a bomb run on Brooklyn, they're going to get hit if we can hit them.
Now, Bill, where was your general quarters station aboard the Brooklyn?
Mine was in the after main battery director. I was called a site setter, and I was one of the main talkers. My phone never went out if we had an emergency.
So you picked up a surface or an air target coming in as soon as you could?
Yeah.
And then directed the batteries to that?
Right.
On the after part of the ship?
And there was a main battery director was up forward.
Let me suggest this is an exceptionally nautical or jaunty pose of you as a petty officer in your white hat, Dixie cup.
Right.
And do you recall where that was taken by any chance?
Yes, I think it was taken in Norfolk. When we came back to Brooklyn, shortly thereafter, I was transferred to the Fitch. And after about a year in the Fitch, they sent me to what they called a fire control school in Norfolk. What it was a vacation from the North Atlantic.
Was the Fitch a DD?
Yes.
Okay.
Bristol type.
Bristol class.
Okay. But getting back to the Brooklyn, we went out and we were in the Caribbean someplace. We never knew for sure when we were. There was rumors that we were sailing around Martinique looking for a German pocket battleship to come out, which could probably outshoot us and outrun us. And then the captain thought that the submarine had shot a torpedo at us. I don't know whether that's true or not, but he was playing cat and mouse with these airplanes. We had 4 float-type planes aboard the Brooklyn, but nothing came of it. It was reported that maybe one of the planes got a submarine. It just was maybe. Then we went to Trinidad for a little while, then back to Brooklyn. We got about 9 days leave, and while we were in New York, I saw the Normandy that had been sabotaged by the Germans. It was keeled over at least 20 degrees, sitting there in the harbor. And then I was sent to Boston and went on to Fitch. Can't remember the call letter, the letters now, but it was a new destroyer. And we searched for a lot of submarines in the North Atlantic, and we had so many submarine attacks that I got so I could sleep through general quarters because I had no station. It was just every day, and we must have killed at least 100,000 tons of cod, and I don't think it ever got close to a submarine. Once we were in Bermuda, and I got to see the great big French submarine with 6-inch guns and a float plane aboard. They took off from there, and that was the last time it was seen. Our first duty on the Fitch was we took 2 groups of planes on the old Ranger to North Africa for the Free French. We were in Trinidad going across once, and the cruiser where all the boys from Iowa or so was there. We got to see it. And it was going to the Pacific. We were going to Africa. And it was sad when you found out that a new ship was lost. And it was just a floating place that held so many guns. They had 5-inch guns, 2 to a turret.
You may recall one of the more significant days in your naval career aboard the USS Brooklyn was 7th of March, 1941. And to give you a hint as to what happened on that day, I'll mention that you were charged with scuttling the Royal Lifeboat, and it was recommended throwing the culprit overboard with an anchor attached.
They didn't do that.
They didn't do that.
No.
But they threatened, according to this charge 2. Charge 1 was that in the Robson WA, now a Seaman Second Class, U.S. Navy, has hitherto willfully and maliciously failed to show reverence and allegiance to our royal person, and is therein and hereby a vile landlubber and pollywog.
Yeah.
And for that, you were awarded the Ancient Order of the Deep that certifies that W.A. Robson Jr., AS2, has been gathered to our fold and duly initiated as a trusty shellback, having created to cross the equator on board the United States ship Brooklyn.
Yeah, that was a fun day.
Tell us about that.
Well, it's been a long time ago. I imagine that they had maybe 300 polywogs aboard, maybe more than that, because a lot of the old sailors hadn't been across. But it was a fun day and nobody got hurt. One of the officers almost had a heat stroke. They made him wear a diving suit, And you know, those diving suits are very heavy. Those shoes must weigh 40 pounds apiece. And at the equator, it's pretty warm too. And I think he comes close to having a heat stroke, but he wouldn't give up.
One of the actions on your case was described as, quote, double irons awaiting action, which would be leg irons.
Right, but they didn't have them.
They didn't.
No, it was all, most of it was all talk. We had to kiss a big fat hairy belly, which was bad enough. But one thing you brought up, we got to go up for seaman first class.
Mm-hmm.
And about the only thing we had to do was so we could tie a square knot in it. And since I had had training in 4-H in tying knots, I was pretty good at doing that. But that was about the only test that we took to go up for first class, which was a big deal.
That was in March of 1941.
Yeah, that's when we were going to New Zealand.
And if I may reference a letter aboard the USS Wadleigh, DD 689, dated 7 December 1943, which is a memorandum to all hands, signed by Walter C. Wynn, Commander, U.S. Navy, commanding.
He was our captain. Yes.
He was your captain. And I quote from his letter, "I don't promise that we will always have the best of assignments, that our tasks will be easy, or that we will touch port often, but we are going to make a name for ourselves as a hard-hitting, fighting aggregation with our sights set on one objective, to aid in bringing this war to a speedy and victorious conclusion. I'm sorry that I cannot promise you Christmas with a pulse, but it seems to be my lot to spend all Christmases at sea."
Mm-hmm. We did.
Did you know him pretty well?
Well, as well as enlisted personnel to know this commanding officer. He didn't communicate as well as the captain of Fitch did. Captain Walpole was at home any place he was. Didn't make any difference whether it's in his own cabin or the bridge or the crew's quarters. He was at home. It was his ship, and we were his people.
Let me cite another letter from 12 June 1944 about the USS Wadleigh from the commanding officer to all hands. Its subject is secret, which is unusual. And the captain's message is to all hands. He quotes paragraph 1, "We are sailing to Saipan Island in the southern Marianas, 101 miles from Guam and about 1,250 miles south by east of Tokyo. It is the most important Japanese base in the Marianas and is 1,000 miles from Eniwetok, our nearest base. We are part of a fire support group, the outfit that goes in and does the close in work of softening up the enemy's defenses so that our troops may land with a minimum of casualties. Our work starts on Dog 1 day when we support the operations of our minesweeping group and beach reconnaissance teams. We have a hot spot and we will spend most of the day in close to the blue and yellow beaches."
We operated within a mile of the beaches almost all the time while the battle was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And we backed up I think it was the 3rd Division of Marines that were there, and tried to cover for them and give them cover. And it was kind of difficult. The spotter knew where we were anchored, and he would point our guns for us, tell us where to fire.
He also says that we will have air support and expect negligible enemy air opposition. There will be a friendly SBD, SB-2Cs, TBFs, F-6Fs, F-4Us, OS-2Us, 8 OCs, PB2Ys, PBMs, and Piper Cubs in the air, all but the latter 3 being in the air during the daylight hours beginning D1.
I didn't see but perhaps one enemy plane in the air, and that was when the battle was practically over. I don't know where it had come from, how they got it in the air, because they didn't control much of the island anymore, I don't think. But they did get one in the air, and everybody took a shot at it. I think they probably flew through the whole fleet safely.
You were still in the after director.
No, this is the Fitch. I mean, the Wadleigh.
The Wadleigh.
Yeah.
Okay.
We only have one director, or destroyers.
One of his last paragraphs, he says, "We shall be opposed. The Nips are our enemies, and until we have unconditional surrender of their misguided leaders, our attack must be pressed with the utmost spirit. They will be fighting on their home ground, and we can expect a hard fight. If you don't get all the news, don't worry. The hunting may be too good for us to stop and talk about it. You will be doing your job to the limit, so will everyone else. We have had news to deliver, but we are saving it this trip for Hirohito. Good luck and good hunting, Walter C. Wynn." You also have some copies of the deck log from the USS Wadleigh, DD 689, and you have some names underlined here on the 16 to 2000 watch. Mustard crew at quarters: Martel, USNR; Hoffelman, USNR, absent; Lindgren and Kufal. Do you ever have occasion in the past 60 years to communicate with any of these men that you served with?
No.
You never had? Did not have a reunion of the Wadleigh?
They had lots of reunions. I didn't go to them. I didn't go to the first one. Was there, I guess, in 1994. I went.
Where was that?
That was in Bermuda. That's why I went.
Oh, great.
Good, great place to be.
Did you see some of your shipmates?
Oh yeah, yeah. Cochran, which I stood a lot of watches with Bud Cochran a lot. He was a coal miner's son from West Virginia, tough as nails, drank a lot, and guess what he ended up being? An English professor at the University of Dayton. That was unbelievable.
Right in your own backyard.
Right.
But you didn't know that.
No.
Were you living in Mainville at the time?
I was living in Lebanon.
In Lebanon.
Which is the same thing.
So have you corresponded with him since then?
Oh, I'm keeping track. I don't go to many meetings anymore because there's nobody there I know. We had 3 crews aboard the Wadleigh. As soon as it was hit, we lost 150 men, I think, almost half the crew. They put them on other ships.
When you say lost, you mean?
They were transferred.
Transferred.
And then when we went to port and came back out, we practically had a new crew. Then it was sold to Chile or Peru and was bought back during the Korean War, so it had a 3rd entirely new crew.
The next letter I'd like to quote from, if I may, is stamped confidential, and it's from the USS Wadleigh, DD 689, dated September 27, 1944, regarding the accident, the mine, apparently. And it's quoted as saying, "Morning of the 16th operated as a mine demolition vessel for 32.9.9. This was necessitated by detachment of all the DMSs the preceding night. Ran afoul of 3 unswept mines, but managed to maneuver clear. We were veterans by afternoon and had learned to keep to the northward of the sweeps and do all our demolition firing to the southward, thus always being in swept waters. I detonated our 23rd mine and was proceeding to overtake the sweeps as they had reported cutting 3 or 4 more when we took number 24 at frame 110 starboard, 10 to 12 feet below the water line. The after 3 machinery compartments and starboard shaft alley flooded, and ship took a 6-degree list to starboard. Jettisoned starboard life rafts, starboard whaleboat, and moved starboard DCs to port side, reducing list to 3 degrees by the time the Bennett took us in tow. After we anchored Bennett moored alongside and furnished us invaluable galley, emergency power, and other services. Had over a dozen gas handy billies and submersible pumps working on the after engine room, but no luck. Sent our diver over and estimated that the hole in the bottom extended from frame 102 to 120 at the keel and nearly up to the bilge keel throughout its length. In case you don't understand, it's one hell of a big hole. There wasn't much we could do at the time but transfer oil from aft to the Bennett using portable submersible pumps. That increased our freeboard aft from 6 feet to 1.5 feet. Made dispatch report to ComInch, etc., requested salvage vessel, and finally turned in to spend an uncomfortable night. The grapple moored alongside at 1900 on the 17th, and then salvage operations began in earnest. Transferred 140 men and 3 officers to Keokuk, temporarily until arrival of LST 661. With assistance of grapple, removed a midship of torpedoes, torpedo mounts, torpedo cranes, guns 43, 44, 21, 22, 23, 24, directors 43 and 44, and loading machine, and placed aboard LST 661. Transferred clipping room, 40 and 20 millimeter ammo, as well as depth charges to ammo ships. Didn't get the after engine room pumped until the 22nd, as there was a 2-foot hole in the forward bulkhead around the starboard shaft, which proved extremely difficult to plug and patch. Have bulkhead shored with only moderate leakage. All machinery in this engine room was undamaged except for immersion in salt water, and now has been operated by steam, electrical equipment being salvaged and cleaned, etc. Number 3 boiler was demolished. Number 4 badly damaged. Starboard shaft distorted. Starboard reduction gear probably wrecked. Damage to starboard turbines unknown. Most of after fire room auxiliaries destroyed. Keeping our fingers crossed with hope that evaporator plant is undamaged. Aluminum backing plate for SC antenna is very fragile. Charlie ended up on top of number 1 torpedo tube. Our casualties were remarkably small. 3 dead, 21 injured, all of whom have been returned to duty except 3 who have been transferred out of the area for hospitalization. All will recover. You can rest assured that once we are patched and towed out of this area, that the Wadleigh will be prepared to return and even the score with the Japs. I regret parting company in such a manner, but it's all the fortunes of war. Don't know in what capacity I will next meet you, but it has been a pleasure to command the ship in your squadron, and I hope to serve with you again. Hope you can do something about Tokyo Rose. Each day she threatens to have us polished off. Please convey my best regards to all the gang. Sincerely, Walter C. Wynn. Can you fill us in on what that event was like?
Well, let's start from the beginning of the Wadleigh. I questioned almost from the beginning what was going on. I was put in the main battery director with 2 other men when we need 4 to operate it. We went to the canal and into the Pacific Ocean, and I was on watch at midnight, and about 1 o'clock I called around to see if everybody was awake. The men on the searchlight didn't answer, so we could control the shutters on the searchlight from the director. And I had Bud Cochran open and close it. Well, it opened, but it wouldn't close, and we lit up the whole Pacific. And so I had Bud run down a couple ladders and up a couple ladders to where the searchlights were. They had tested them at sunset and forgot to turn them off. And the controls were jammed, burnt. And we had to call to the engine room to turn off the power. And I knew that I was in a sling. And 8 o'clock reports came and went, and I was not called up to see the captain. I was shocked and a little surprised because I didn't know what I could tell him except what had happened and what I'd been trained to do on the Fitch.
Sure.
But nothing happened at all, was not called. So we went out into the Pearl, and very shortly there, we took the, I believe it was the New York? Was the New York sunk at Pearl Harbor? I was out of there, I can't remember.
Could be.
And
I think it was damaged.
they took it around the East Coast to fix it, and they brought it back about the same time we did. And they left the harbor, and we went with them. And within a half an hour, they ran aground. So we came back to the harbor and left them until high tide and lifted them off of the sandbar that they were stuck on. And then a week or so later, we in an LST went out, and the Japs had a small island someplace. We didn't know where we were at. And on the way there, Captain Wynn wanted a security watch of the chiefs carrying .45s. And he picked on the pharmacists. Well, the pharmacists aren't supposed to carry weapons. And he objected, but the captain told him that he was the captain and he better do as he's told. So we took the island. Probably there was a radio station there, giving weather reports maybe to Japan and anything else that would be of value to them. We got back to Pearl, and immediately the doctor and the pharmacist went ashore and came back an hour later with a full captain, and that was the end of the security watch. The captain said he couldn't have it, he wouldn't have it. And so we left and went on out in the Pacific, and we carried Marines from one post to another. We ferried pilots back to get new planes for the ones that were lost. And we were with the fleet for just a couple of days. And the airplanes taking off, I suppose in the hot weather, they couldn't make enough fresh water to get up really enough speed. When these planes would take off, they'd have to dive, the bombers particularly, would have to dive towards the water. And if their tail touched the water, that was the end of them. And that happened to a couple of them. And the bombs that they were carrying went off maybe 10, 15 seconds after the plane went underwater. And that was the end.
That's tragic.
It was tragic to see and watch. And then another time, a plane was coming in from a landing, and he was probably 2 football fields short of the deck, and he just almost dropped. Well, we picked up the pilot, but the rear gunner was gone. I guess he went down with the plane. And then we went to Saipan and Tinia, where we did some wonderfully good work.
Shore bombardment.
Yes. One day we were watching the island and we saw something. We turned over to it and it was a lady carrying a child. First one we had seen in a long time. So we stayed on her and she walked for maybe half a mile along the cliff. Then she went out of sight. And they said she went down a ravine. And we were told to fire phosphorus shells in there. And it still bothers me. I know had to be, but it doesn't make it any easier. And then we were given the task near the end of the Battle of Saipan to go around the island. We had a bullhorn and somebody could speak Japanese or Korean, I don't know what he was speaking, telling them not to jump, that we were not going to kill them and eat their babies. And a couple of years ago, there was a Marine talking on the History Channel, and he was there shooting those babies while they were falling because they didn't die necessarily when they hit the rocks, and they were crying and screaming. And he was very shook up even today, 50 years afterwards. And finally the battle's over, and we go out on picket duty. And I get off at midnight on my watch. By this time we have 4 people in the director. And I'm walking down the starboard side, and I notice that the guns are all trained out.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something up there, I can't hear it, but it's there. And I hear, just before I go down the ladder to the crew's quarters, I hear a big splash. And we didn't fire any guns. So the next day when this crew is relieving me, I said, what happened last night? Well, they said a plane came in, and we had IFF, friend or foe. I don't know whether you still had it in your service.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they didn't show any IFF, so evidently they were foe, but we didn't fire at them. And I thought that was kind of interesting.
Wonder what caused it to splash.
Well, I suppose the bomb just missed us. Must have been very close, or I wouldn't have heard it.
So it did go off.
No, it didn't go off.
Didn't go off.
Just a splash.
Just a splash.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
So was it done?
Well, let's hope so.
It's probably still down there.
Well, I helped put an ash can over in Boston Harbor that's probably still there from the Fitch. We'd been in the yard and they did some work, but nobody told me they'd worked on the firing circuit of the K guns. I don't know if the chief knew. He said, go check them. So I went and checked them, as I always did. We always checked them to make sure that they were hot when he pulled the switch up there. We never checked them if they were cold. Well, they were hot all the time. And so, when they put the powder in there and closed the breech, off it went. Right in the harbor. Well, I was petrified because I was the one that checked it. But there was nothing we could do about it. And division officer was Mr. Kane by that time. And I was sitting down in the plotting room, sweating, smoking a cigarette, and he comes in. I thought, I'm smoking this cigarette, he'll kill me. He was smoking one too. So he was just as concerned as I was. But to get back to the Wadleigh, then we just goofed off for a while, and then we went to Pelham, where we had the accident. And I'd been on watch in the morning, went to lunch, and after lunch I came back to the main battery director. And all of a sudden I hear yelling between 2 voices in the bridge. I don't know what they're saying, but they're yelling. We're picking up speed. We're heading to the minefield. And I see a sailor running up to the forecastle, and I think Lieutenant Wadleigh's probably got the deck, and he's arguing with the captain. That's what I think. Don't know that. And just almost instantly, the sailor who's went up on the forecastle there is running back, pointing and yelling and screaming. You can't hear him, but his mouth is making well. And we hit the mine.
What happened to the sailor on deck?
Nothing.
Nothing.
No, he was all right. He, was midships before it hit.
So the 3 sailors that were
They
killed
were in the engine room.
in the engine room.
One of them got scalded with superheated steam. I saw him back on the ash cans, talking, smoking a cigar. And then I heard afterwards that he started to turn pale, and two sailors grabbed him and drug him up to the doctor's
Sick bay.
but there was nothing they could do for him. They opened it, what do you call it, when they open your throat here.
I know what you mean.
Well, anyway, they did that, but they didn't have any oxygen available, and he probably would have died anyway. I think the other two drowned below decks in the engine room. Two engine rooms in the fire room were all flooded, plus one of the cruise quarters, small cruise quarters were flooded. The engineers said they didn't want to stay afloat.
Do you know if that was a free-floating mine or one that was anchored with a...
I think it was anchored. I think they were all anchored.
So were you actually in the mine field?
Yes.
Probably.
And to go through a virgin minefield at top speed, it makes you wonder about the captain, what he was doing.
That seems to be a faulty judgment.
I think it was very faulty. In fact, you know, every time we came into port, he always went to the hospital ship.
For some reason that we don't know.
Don't know. We do know that there was plenty of liquor in the South Pacific.
Sure.
We just don't know who had it and where it was. But it was there.
Did you have alcohol on board?
We did have beer, select 6 from San Diego.
That was legal.
Well, it probably wasn't legal.
Probably wasn't legal.
No, I don't think it was.
And alcohol, of course, wasn't.
No.
But many officers or chiefs would keep it in their lockers.
Well, it was in some place, I don't know where.
Yeah.
Now, when we were in Bermuda, on board the Brooklyn, this first class machinist, he would take a bottle of scotch to his leg and bring it aboard. And he drank it carefully, and nobody really cared, I don't think. But they built what they called a coffer dam that they sank and brought up tight with cables. They had about 4 cables around the ship. And they put 2 6-inch pumps, but it didn't take it down any. And we're sitting there, and one day it begins to get dark. It was a nice day until then. Middle of the afternoon, it's getting dark, and this ship leaves. The PVYs, they all take off, and we're left tied to the repair ship. And it gets worse and worse, and the storm comes. And I eat, and I go up and it's snapping hawsers like you'd snap a string. And the only thing that holds this is an inch steel cable to the repair ship. And I see the captain, he's got a .45 strapped to his waist, and I'm wondering, I don't think I want to be up here. So I go take a shower and go hit my bunk, because I'm not a seaman anyway. And I often wonder, because you see, they never mention that they're going across that minefield at blank speed. They don't tell you that in the log. But that's what they were trying to do.
Should have been in the log, possibly.
Sure, it should have been, but I think they were going after a case of, they were taking a case of scotch to the admiral and getting one.
Wouldn't be the first time.
Wouldn't be the first time. I think that's what they were doing. I don't think it was government business. I think this was private business.
Result of the loss of 3 sailors.
You know, and the ship, for all practical purpose, I think they only kept it afloat because the engineers wanted to see if they could straighten out the keel and make it work, which they did. And then we had to listen to Tokyo Rose, and nobody was disturbed by her. I'm going to come and get you boys. I know where you're at. We all know where you're at. And finally, they brought a floating dry dock and put us in. And Captain put it on the loudspeaker that the bombers were coming. And I went topside and took a look, and I could see 2 fly specks out there. And pretty soon they got bigger and bigger, and that was the Japanese planes. And fortunately for us, when they were probably 2 miles away, they changed course and went for the Sequel and Tug. And they missed it, and then 2 P-38s came down and drove them into the sea. And that was it. And that wasn't too long. I guess September we went back on 1 screw to Mare Island and got all fixed up new. And we went to sea. And my division officer now was Mr. Wadleigh, and I think we had a superior captain aboard. And Mr. Wallace was a nephew of Lew Wallace.
Oh, who's Lew Wallace?
Lew Wallace wrote the book, Ben-Hur. He defended Cincinnati from the Southern troops that were coming up. They got stopped at Danville, I think, but they were heading for Cincinnati, and he got the Army and the civilians to work together to build breastworks around Cincinnati. And then after that, he was made, what do you call it, the governor of New Mexico.
Mexico. Didn't know that.
Yeah. And,
But Bill, if you would, reference this photograph, and on the back of it, there's notation that says, taken in Covington, Kentucky, at Joy Jones' home about 1943. And obviously,
it wasn't 43, it was 45.
Okay.
That's my wife's family.
All right. And the names are on the back. Could you describe who's in that picture for us? There's a wave in there. It looks like the second class or first class wave.
That's my sister-in-law. And I don't see George here. George was a World War I Navy man. I don't know if he ever went to sea. He came from Norfolk, Virginia.
George Robson?
No. George Jones.
Jones.
Yeah. Is that right? Yeah. And this is my wife's grandmother and grandfather, and her mother, Aunt Ivy, and her. Yeah, they got the wrong date there. That should be 45.
Okay.
Because I was in Washington I finally got to go to fire control school when the war was over.
Well, that's a very nice picture. I hope we can incorporate it into the interview. In the time that we have remaining, I'd like you to focus on the end of the war, as you recall it, and in August, particularly of 1945, when the decision was made to drop the bombs on Japan. Could you tell us your opinion of that as a decision by Harry Truman?
Right. I understand now. I was so happy that the war was over because I knew we were going back, and they were talking about making a landing and
In Japan.
And also in civilian life, I met the man who took the first big plane off of Tenia. He and I went to Turkey together. We just happened to meet aboard a line over there, and I got to talking to him.
On a pleasure trip.
Yeah. And he flew the first plane off, and he said, when I got to the end of the runway, we were about 100 feet above the water, and I dove down 60 feet before I pulled up because I needed flying speed. And he said the boats out there really scattered when they saw me come. But it was too late, but he said I missed them all. And I know the damage that he did to Japan. They firebombed it. I've understood lately they killed 2 million people. I thought it was terrible they dropped the bomb, but then I realized I thought they did not have to drop the bomb. They did not have to invade Japan. Japan was beaten, really beaten. They could have placed 2 aircraft carrier or 3 around there for the next 20 years and not lost a person. They didn't have to go, they didn't have to do anything. That would have been cheaper than an atomic bomb anyway.
I see.
And just look at the lot, and if they hadn't invented the atomic bomb, why did they have to waste 500,000 lives to go into Japan? Japan probably would have fought us tooth and nail. I don't know. I can't see them surrendering. We didn't. And it's a waste of human lives. And I understand that Truman's advisors did not want him to drop the bomb, that they wanted to invade. Because that's where they get their rank from, and they get their names from. And, you know, as a 20-year-old, I didn't see anything wrong with war, but as a 90-year-old, it doesn't gain us anything. All the wars we've had, the Mexican War, how many people have we killed in the Mexican War? And that's because we wanted 3 ports on the West Coast for commerce. And I think of my ancestor who fought in the Revolutionary War. What did he get out of it? He didn't get anything out of it. He still couldn't vote unless he had some wealth. His wife sure couldn't vote or serve on juries, and his field hand couldn't. And when he wanted to make a little whiskey to take to market, President Washington, God bless him, was there with 5,000 regular troops to stop him. That was called the Whiskey Rebellion, I do believe. We surely ought to be able to, if we have any brains at all, we surely ought to be able to figure out not going to war. Our trouble in the Mideast right now. What were we doing in Iran in 1955? Setting up the Shah. And what did we do in Peru? Or Lima, where's the copper mines? They're in Chile. I think our CIA was down there in force. And so now Anaconda Copper is working in Chile like they did in Montana. And I'm just not for war. I don't think, I know we had too many incompetent people in charge of the war, the Army and the Navy. Our great admiral, we find out now, Nimitz,
Yes.
buried his mistake, wouldn't let it out until a few years ago when he was preparing for Saipan. He had 20 LSTs all tied together in Pearl Harbor, and one of them went up, and they all went up, and they lost some 200 sailors. And he buried that and didn't make the news. And Tarawa, I think he was in charge of Tarawa, the Navy was. And he left those Marines stranded 300 yards from shore, and they had to walk in against the enemy gunfire.
These were major mistakes, in your opinion.
Oh.
And historians still find puzzlement with these decisions, and consequently, your opinions to be respected.
Well, I just think you don't send men against something you don't know what's there. You're going to get hurt.
Well, in conclusion, Bill, if we can, I'd like to thank you on behalf of the entire United States of America for your loyal and honorable service during a time of crisis in World War II. And again, thank you very much for interviewing for the Library of Congress and the Veterans History Project.
I just hope that in the future somebody can read what us veterans have to say
I'm sure they will.
and come to a good conclusion.
Thank you.
And I thank you.
You're welcome.